All right, let's go ahead and begin. Thank you all so much for joining us today at this Learning and Growing 2021 presentation. You're at How to Improve the Quality of Discussion in the Asynchronous Discussion Forum. My name is Kayla Elkin, and I am on the marketing team here at Hawks Learning. Our speaker today is Dr. T.L. Brink. Dr. Brink has spent the last 24 years teaching psychology online for the San Bernardino Community College District. He has authored or edited 18 books, including 4 textbooks. He has degrees from Claremont, Santa Clara, and the University of Chicago. He has previously served on the faculties of Universidad Iberoamericana, University of the Redlands, University of California, Riverside, Loma Linda University School of Public Health, and Stanford University School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. Dr. Brink lives in Southern California, Chicago, and Mexico. We will have a live Q&A session with Dr. Brink at the end of the presentation, so please enter any questions into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen as we go, and we'll get to them after the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out to all attendees when the video is processed and ready for distribution. On that note, I will hand it over to our presenter. The floor is yours whenever you're ready, Dr. Brink.
Thank you. I am T.L. Brink. I am from Crafton Hills College. We are part of the San Bernardino Community College District. One caveat I want to start out with is that all of you will find that some of my suggestions do not fit your discipline, your students, or your style of teaching. But I think that I can come up with some practical solutions. Some of the things I'm going to say today, you can find relevant to what you teach. My focus today will be specifically on asynchronous discussion on a learning management system forum, the kind of discussion boards you have on Canvas, Blackboard, or Moodle. I'm not going to talk about the kind of synchronous class discussion you would have in a regular on-ground class meeting in a classroom where you're all seeing each other face to face. And what I'm talking about today is not really designed for the kind of synchronous remote instruction that's been going on to a great extent over the past year on platforms such as Zoom and chat rooms. I want to start with an analogy. The analogy is a 3-legged stool. In order for the stool to stand, all 3 legs must be strong and properly aligned with each other, not too short, not too tall. They've all got to fit for that stool to stand. So what are the 3 legs, the 3 essential components of any good instruction, including class discussion? The first component is the subject matter, the discipline, what is being taught. And here you have to go with your course objectives, your learning outcomes. What is it exactly that needs to be taught and needs to be mastered by the student? The second leg of the stool is the student. And here you've got to look at the student's individual strengths, goals, and what obstacles that particular student faces. Now, my students are very interesting, and I've designed my courses for them. I teach at a community college, and I teach mostly students who are in the BSN pipeline. Most of them are already in the healthcare field, working as CNAs, LVNs, psychiatric technicians at the state mental hospital, or they are EMTs, paramedics, injured firefighters, or burnt out police officers. So they've got a very difficult schedule. And also they've got a very interesting background. Those are my students, and I've developed my course to meet their needs. And occasionally we'll get the 18-year-old fresh out of Redlands High School. Because my students differ in their backgrounds and in their goals, I have some who want to be social workers or psychologists. I provide many options, different kinds of projects, different kinds of grading, and that is also true of the discussion board. I'll have a lot of different discussion topics. Some topics will fit the interests and the background of certain students and not others. So I have a great deal of different topics. I do not believe in the idea that everybody has to do everything exactly the same way. The third leg in that three-legged stool is you, the instructor. And we are different. We have different abilities, different interests, and different lifestyles. I'm sure there are things you can do that I cannot. There are things that you are interested in that I am not. And most importantly, we may differ in lifestyle, specifically limitations. There are certain things that each of us cannot do, perhaps because of our commitments in elder care or child care or the career that a spouse may have. So what is a well-designed course? Something like that three-legged stool that's going to be appropriate to the subject matter, the student, and the instructor. Today, I'm going to look at some of the different uses of the discussion board. I'm going to look at how it could be used for introductions, for content presentation and assessment. That's probably the big one. For development of a term project and for preparation for exams. Now, in every class, we want to build some kind of sense of community and get the student oriented to what the class is about. In an on-campus class, there's a variety of little icebreakers, fun activities that you might also use at a party or something. And they work very well in a on-ground kind of situation. And maybe you found some for remote synchronous instruction that also work. I'm not so sure that those work as well in the asynchronous discussion board environment. What has worked for me and my students has been reveals. Tell us about yourself. Really tell us about yourself. Now, some of the easy questions would be where? Where were you born? Where were you raised? Where do you live now? Where would you like to live? And most of my students are not going to stay in San Bernardino. Maybe they want to move as far as 10 miles east to Redlands. Some want to move out of California. A lot of them want to move to the beach or up in the mountains. What kind of job do you have now? Well, a lot of them work in Amazon warehouses if they're not working in the healthcare field already. What's your major? What's your career goal? Who are you in terms of family, pets, children, significant others? Who are you in terms of your music and your hobbies? And then we can also suggest an answer to some more sensitive kinds of questions. Now, I tell the students, you don't have to reveal anything that you're not comfortable revealing. Are you a veteran? I find that most veterans want to talk and share about their military experiences. Some don't. Who are you in terms of your religion, your politics, your sexual orientation? Interestingly enough, in recent years, my students are much more willing to admit that they're transgender than to admit that they belong to a certain religious denomination or that they support a certain political candidate. Now, I don't grade those initial introductions. My purpose is just to have the students say who they are, start building the bonds of community. It's very useful that some students will say that they work at a certain hospital, and another student will then in the discussion say, what's it like at the hospital? Are they hiring LVNs? What do they pay? So it's a good way to form that kind of community. I don't grade those initial introductions, but I grade most of the other types of posts. And here's what I've found about grading discussion. If you don't grade discussion, you will probably have very little activity on your discussion board. Even worse, the quality of that discussion will probably be pretty low. I do not recommend grading on a percent type of thing, like here are 20 posts. You've got to put something on each. And if you don't put something on this particular topic, you get a 0, and that 0 is averaged in with everything else. That can really lower a student's grade. One bad post, one missed post is really going to harm that student's average. What I recommend instead is a kind of multiple options grading, where you tell them you'll grade a certain number of posts. They can pick which ones to write on. That gives more flexibility. Another tool that I found very helpful in the grading is I do not grade every single post. I grade posting days. And I'll explain why. I have a rule, only one post per day. Let me tell you why I came up with that rule. Before I did, I noticed a very interesting and frustrating phenomenon. On the last day of the semester, some students got on the discussion board for the first time and made all 50 posts. And then when I had to read those 50 posts, I realized they made the same mistakes in every one of those 50 posts. The student really didn't learn anything from those posts, and I hated reading those posts. So students may make one post a day. I also have a rule that on any topical thread, a student may make only one post. That post is graded, then the next day, the student goes on to a different topical thread and makes one post there for the day. If you allow students to repost on the same topic, here's what you get. You put some criticism to their initial post, the student posts again, and maybe you'll give one more point to the student, but still not a very good score. And the student will then say, well, why didn't you give me full credit? I did what you said. And then you have to say, no, you didn't. And the student said, well, yes, I did. And you end up just arguing about the grade right there in the post. So what I tell students is I'll count your 10 best posting days for 10% of your grade. Or I'll count your 20 best posting days for 20% of your grade, your 30 best for 30%, your 40 best for 40%, even your 50 best posting days for half of your semester grade. I keep it in terms of these multiples of 10, otherwise it gets too complicated to calculate. Now, each individual post, I score on a 0 to 10 basis. And I tell students that a 10 is absolute, something beyond perfect. It's something that is totally unexpected, extraordinary, and blows me away in terms of its insight and quality. And I have A students who've had me for 3 courses who've never gotten a 10 from me. So don't expect a 10. Most good posts that don't have any obvious errors will get a 9. And that's kind of the modal grade for most of the posts. Every time you make a little error, including spelling, punctuation, grammar, and misuse of terms, will cost you 1 point. If you totally miss the boat, don't give the right answer, I'll give a 0. And I'm not afraid to give a 0 because I know I use multiple options grading, and that 0 is not going to drag down the student's overall average. It's a powerful message to the student. Nope, this post is not really worth anything in terms of your demonstration of course mastery. This way, the student can always do another post on another topic the next day and improve the grade. The zeros don't count against you. The nines add up and eventually earn you an A. This also makes for the following situation. Slow and steady is the winning formula. A student posts once a day. The student either gets a 9 or is told by me, here's the problem with your post. This little problem that cost you a point or two, or the big problem that gave you a 0. And the student then comes back the next day on another topic, learns from the previous mistake. Each post followed by a correction from me or from one of the other students leads to better performance in the future. Let's talk about the content of these posts. What do I get them to write about? I'll tell you what has not worked for me and what has worked for me. What has not worked are vague questions that lead to broad, generic, superficial regurgitations of what I said in my class notes or in the textbook. Here's an example of such a question. Discuss the causes of the Civil War. Each student will try to bring in as many different points, lightly mentioned, and when you have to read those, it is so boring. It's like reading one of those end of semester poorly written essay exams. I go in the opposite direction. All of my posts emphasize focus and depth rather than breadth, so that each student's post is different and quite interesting for me to read and for the rest of the class to read. Here's one analogy I have for focus. Be like Lake Baikal, not like Lake Erie. Lake Baikal and Lake Erie are almost the same size in terms of their surface. Lake Baikal's a little bit longer, Lake Erie's a little bit wider, but the big difference is Lake Baikal is over a mile deep. Lake Erie's only 200 feet deep, and that's the big difference. Another analogy is be like a woodpecker, not like a butterfly. A woodpecker stays in one place and actually gets down and deep and accomplishes something. The butterfly flits from place to place, hard to track where it's been, impossible to guess where it's going. And I have some students whose posts sort of look like that too. Now, in terms of the specific topics I ask them to post on, I like give an example. I'll come up with a topic and I'll say, give me an example. Now, what's really interesting is when my students do have a clinical background, they're working as an EMT, they can talk about last night's 50-50 run of a patient to Ward 5B in the county mental hospital. Or I have a student working at the state mental hospital talking about an experience on the ward. Those are great examples, or examples from personal experience. Another thing I do is I send them out on the internet to a particular test or a simulation, have them go through it, and then comment on one particular part of the test. For example, University of Arizona has a great test online for Alzheimer's disease. I have the students take the test themselves. It's a hard test. And I have them say, what is one particular item on the test that might result in a false positive or a false negative in terms of dementia assessment? Or I'll come up with a given problem in society like teen suicide. And I'll say, what is one cause? And I'll say, don't give me a vague explanation like culture or stress. You have to be more specific than that. Or here's a problem, suggest one solution. Or I'll give them a given article or TED Talk to look at, and I'll give them a list of specific questions, and I'll say, pick one of these questions and give me an answer. So my favorite TED Talk on this, and this will work just about in any class, is by this guy, Alain de Botton, a Swiss philosopher. And the video of his that I like the best is Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person. Just a 20-minute video. And in that, I come up with about 20 different questions that can be asked about different parts of the video. And students love to look at that video, and they love to discuss the topics raised in it. And you could probably use that for a lot of other classes as well. Another thing I do on the content posts is I give them structure, templates, and here's why. Some students are masters of mishmash, and they will talk around a topic, bloviate, say nothing of substance. I think their high school English teachers let them get away with that. I don't. There's got to be some kind of structure. I'll give you an example. One topic I have used in a world religions class is I have them go talk to their neighbors, not another student, not someone who's taken a world religions course, but actually go to the 45-year-old plumber that you live next door to and say, you're doing an assignment for one of your class. How do you define religion? And that person will say something like, well, that's what you do on Sunday. And then in addition to giving the definition provided by the neighbor, the student has to describe the interviewee. Well, he's a 45-year-old plumber. He studied to be a firefighter, but was not hired. He was raised Methodist. He converted to Baptist, but after his divorce with the Baptist wife, he became a Pentecostal, and he stopped going to church. Something like that. Clarify the terminology that the interviewee used. Did the interviewee use vague, pejorative, or euphemistic terms like faith, belief, opinion? If so, can you get below those terms into a more scientific, precise understanding of what might have been implied by the definition? Here's another good question that the post would have to answer. Is the definition provided broad enough to include all aspects of religion? What might it miss? And finally, is the definition provided narrow enough to exclude non-religious phenomena? Is it an overly broad definition? Now, in the definition provided here, religion is what you do on Sundays. It's obviously not narrow enough, because a lot of what people do on Sunday, go to the mall, watch football, are not what we would normally consider to be parts of organized religion. Here's another example I use. It's one of the first posts I have them do in a psychology class. Use a complete sentence to describe an interaction between a stimulus, an organism, and a response. Then in 3 separate sentences, identify the stimulus, the organism, and the response. In other words, I'm looking for simplicity and clarity, just to show that the student has mastered the concept. So here's an example. My dog was scratching himself because he has fleas. The stimulus was the fleas. The organism was my dog. And the response was that he was scratching himself. Now, even though most students will demonstrate this and get the full 9 points, some students will demonstrate an obvious error that you then correct, or some other student will see and correct right there on the discussion board. And somebody might mistake an internal motive for an external stimulus. And then you have to sort of explain the difference. When I ask for an example or for a reason, I recommend this particular format. I call it the hump ace format for giving one particular reason or one particular example. And that is, I want them to state the conclusion first in the first sentence. That gives them the kind of focus I want to see. Otherwise, they meander around and they may or may not finally get to their conclusion. First sentence, conclusion. The patient is diagnosed as this. The solution here is that. So a conclusion first. Then the example is presented. And finally, before you submit that click button and where the post is submitted, make sure that key course terms, theories, have been applied in the example. Here's another discussion board topic I found very useful to master a key concept in the lifespan development class. Describe one of your behaviors or decisions and how it illustrates something about your cohort. Do not give a vague generalization or a list of adjectives, but a specific behavior or choice. You must explain that this was not unique to your upbringing, but was widespread throughout the cohort. Here's another example. If you were going to design a special app to help ADHD children, what would you have it attempt to accomplish? And then how would you do research to make sure your app really was effective? Describe the research that would verify the effectiveness of that app. Your sample would be drawn from the population of children diagnosed with ADHD. You would then conduct a randomized controlled trial. 2 groups randomly assigned, treated differently. Specifically, describe how you would manipulate the independent variable. Describe how you would measure the dependent variable. Are there important confounding variables that you should attempt to control? Another thing I have them do is actually read a professional journal article or a scientific journal article. I find a lot of good articles from Medscape. Here's an example of a classic psychological study I'll give them to dissect now. And it's a very simple study. Infant rats were separated from their mothers. Each rat was then randomly assigned to one of 2 groups. The first group of rats received regular stroking with a paintbrush from lab assistants in order to simulate how the mother's rats would lick the baby rats. The second group of rats did not receive such stroking. After 10 days, all rats were weighed, and the first group weighed more. So I'm going to ask 5 questions, and each question will be taken by a different student. What kind of research was this? Experiment, survey, case study. If the student gets the wrong answer, I'll explain why it's wrong. And the student has to explain why it was an experiment. What kind of variable is the species? Well, they were all rats, so that was a constant. What kind of variable is whether the rats were separated from their mothers? That was a constant. They were all separated from their mothers. What kind of variable is whether the rats received the paintbrush strokes? That was the independent variable manipulated, making this an experiment. What kind of variable is the rat's weight? That was the dependent variable, the outcome. Present a clear statement about what causal relationship, if any, can be inferred from these data. I might permit more than one correct answer on that last question. One thing I really like to get in any kind of discussion is interaction, not just me talking to the students in a one-on-one situation. I want the students to interact with each other beyond more than saying, hey, that's a great post. So how do you get students to read each other's posts and respond constructively? Well, I give a separate category of points called corrections points for interacting with others, for pointing out the kind of errors, problems that I point out. And after a while, we've got several helpers going on the discussion board and pointing out the problems in other students' posts. And I give the most points for extensions, where a student might read another student's post giving an example of what Freud might say about a given situation. And the other student says, yes, and this also fits Jung's idea. Jung would say this and that. And those are really the great moments of teaching, when you see students utilizing advanced theories. I also have a rule that you don't get credit for repeating someone else's answer. Someone's already given an example and you come up with the same example. No, you don't get any points for that example. If somebody has already answered question number 3 about the baby rat experiment, you don't get any points for repeating that correct answer. So in order to make sure that you're going to get credit for your unique answer, you've got to read what everybody else has already said. One of the saddest things is when students repeat a wrong answer that I've already said was wrong. So read the discussion prior to your unique post so that you don't come up with any repeated answers, right answers or wrong answers. Another thing I do in many of my classes is I have a term project. I teach the research methods class, where the student has to come up with a quantitative empirical study. And I find the discussion board a great way to help develop those major projects. So the first week, I'll just have them talk about topics of interest and share their own ideas about those topics. And I'll chime in and say, you might consider this kind of experiment. You might get that kind of database for doing a broad archival study. And then the next week, we talk about what kinds of library resources might be helpful on your topic. What kind of ethical considerations might your topic open up in terms of informed consent or from certain populations that might be vulnerable, confidentiality. And then by the 4th week, students can come up with full proposals, which are then criticized and helped along by the other students. Later on, as they start gathering their data, they can talk about problems at certain sources of information, or they can talk about problems with certain statistical programs, selecting certain statistical tests as opposed to others. Then when the numbers are finally analyzed, they can just present a sentence or 2 summary of their findings. And then by the 8th or 10th week, they can come up with full abstracts that the other students can read, criticize, and make suggestions on. Now, I don't use the discussion board for sharing the complete write-ups, the 10 or 20 page paper based upon the empirical data. I find that Google Docs may be a better way to go for that than a discussion board. So the discussion board is not the only tool you should use. The last thing I want to suggest is you can use discussion boards for an exam cram, where here you tell a student, go ahead, post a question about something you fear will be on the final exam, but you cannot seem to remember. And then you invite other students to reply with the correct answer. And even going beyond that, suggest a mnemonic device for remembering the correct answer. And here we get very creative, very interesting. And of course, it's really important that you, the instructor, monitor all the discussion boards, but especially this one, to make sure that the other students are coming up with the correct answer and with actually useful mnemonics. I'm going to give you 3 examples, and hopefully these 3 examples will really stick in your minds so that afterward, if I were to ask the question on your final exam, you would get it right. These mnemonics may also make you cringe. They're kind of hokey. For example, there are many branches of psychology, and one branch of psychology is called IO, and that stands for Industrial Organizational Psychology. And it focuses on the workplace. It is devoted to questions such as, how do we select the best workers for a job? How do we train them? How do we supervise them? How do we sustain good morale? We want happy, productive workers. So here is the mnemonic for remembering what I/O psychology involves. A good mnemonic brings forth several senses. You have something to visualize, and you might even have a little song or a sound that ties in. So I want you to visualize the first full-length animated movie from Walt Disney. The year was 1937, and the movie was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, I'm going to focus not on Snow White, but on the dwarfs. They were workers. They worked in a mine. They got up every morning and they went to work. These were good workers. They were happy workers. Well, one of them was happy, but even Grumpy went to work and did a good job. And as they went to work, they would sing their song. Can you hear them singing that song as they went to work? I-O, I-O, it's off to work we go. I-O, I-O. And now you will remember that I-O refers to the psychology of the workplace. Then remember Ivan Pavlov and the salivating dog? Can you remember that Pavlov was the one that trained the salivating dog to salivate at the sound of a bell? Let me tell you how Pavlov did that. What he did is he surgically implanted a tube into the dog's salivary gland so that when the dog would salivate, the saliva would run down the tube and be accumulated. And that way Pavlov could measure the salivation more precisely. Well, let's look at the little dog who was involved in that research. And let's ask that little dog, little doggy, who put that thing in your mouth? Listen, the dog is going to tell us. Dog, who put that tube in your mouth? Pavlov, Pavlov. Finally, there's the example of John Watson. He worked with a baby. The baby was little Albert. Now, little Albert was not naturally afraid of a white rat. He thought it was something to play with. But Watson demonstrated that a baby could be conditioned to fear the white rat. So the baby was playing, a white rat was introduced to the baby, and Watson was in the background, and he took a hammer and hit a large metal bar, making a horrible sound, frightening the baby. And because of this, the baby began to associate this white rat with that frightening sound. And then the baby was afraid every time he saw the white rat. So we might ask that baby who's crying, what's the matter, son? What's the matter, son? What's, son? Watson? I bet you have even better examples than what I've given you here. Examples that fit your particular discipline. Examples that your students will come up with. Well, I've talked about a lot of different things. Not every piece of the puzzle is going to fit the big puzzle that you have to put together. But I hope that some of these pieces are going to fit, or at least inspire you. I am T.L. Brink, and you can reach me at the San Bernardino Community College District. Well, I'm going to stop my screen sharing, and let's see what questions we have.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Brink. We do have some questions I saw while you were presenting. So just to start at the top there, Do you think requiring students to cite one reference in each post increases the depth of their discussion responses?
I think it can. And if part of what you want to emphasize is that, go ahead and require it. And I think it's also good if you set certain limitations on what kind of citation you want. Teach them the difference between just any old internet site and something that would have more credibility. Have them find their articles, for example, in something like Scholar Google rather than just regular Google. But certainly, that's fine. Okay, the next one. Doesn't the one post per day rule limit or preclude true discussions back and forth? Now, that's a very good question. And I draw a distinction between a post which is made to get points and then the comments that you make on somebody else. That's a separate category. And I'll say I'll count your 10 best comments throughout the semester as a separate category for 10% of your grade. Excellent point. Okay, anonymous attendee. If I understand your multiple grading strategy, you grade posts every single day, correct? How do you manage that in terms of time? Very good question. Also, if you only allow them to post once per topic, does that mean they aren't expected to discuss other students? No, they can go back and respond to other students' posts. That's a separate category. But back to your question about does this take time? Oh, yeah. I mean, this is a 24/7 situation. My students are in the middle of the night between ambulance calls. Yeah, they are posting all the time. And so I get on the discussion board several times a day, and there is no day that's a break. But because it is asynchronous, I can have a life and be away from the discussion board for a few hours. If you want to limit the number of days or hours you're on the board, fine, be clear with that with your student. But for me, it's almost like an addiction. I mean, I'm 71 and I don't need the money. I could very easily retire. I could have retired many years ago, but I just love what I do. I love my students. I love what I teach. And I can't think of anything more exciting than to get on the discussion board and talk about these exciting things with my great students. Okay, Sandra Trejos. This seems to take a lot of time-wise reading. Yes. How many students do you have? Do you have a rubric in the LMS platform? I don't necessarily have the rubric in the LMS platform. The grading is not automated. It's done all by me. I get approximately 45 students is the cap per section. Some sections don't get that much to begin with, like the research methods. The other ones do fill up, but I get a quick drop off and students realize I'm tough and they can't just BS their way on the posts. So I may end up with 35, 30 students per section, even though I start off with 45, and I teach 5 sections per semester. Okay, another anonymous attendee. How do you prevent students from simply copying others' posts if asking direct questions about research where there's only, as I said, you don't get credit for repeating somebody else's answer. So if somebody else answered the question number 3 about what kind of variable was whether or not the rats were separated from their mothers, that's already been answered. And if another student comes up with the same answer, sorry, that was already asked and answered, you get a 0. And this way they do come up with their unique answers. Okay. Dr. Ava Selly, I think I understand. I presume that this would mean that students have the option of either posting 2 different prompts or sticking with the same prompt when they return the next day. Actually, they have a lot of options, but one option is not to stick with the same prompt and come up with multiple answers to the same prompt. I tell them only 1 post per discussion thread. I want them to try their best on a given thing, then move on to another topic. Let's see. So your students post every day, 7-7. Yes. And I'll explain why. First of all, religion. I do have students who are Catholic or LDS or evangelical Christian who do take the Sunday as their day of worship. But our college is located very close to Loma Linda, which is sort of the world capital of Seventh-day Adventism. So I have a very large number of students who are SDA, and for them, the Sabbath is typical of the Jewish Sabbath, and many of them are very devout and observant when it comes to that. I also have a few Muslim students and a good many students who do not adhere to any particular religion. And I don't want to prescribe which day they have to take off and as their day of rest. And so, yes, they may post any day of the week. I also tell them if you have a particular difficult day, like one day of the week, you have a double shift at the hospital, one day a week, your spouse works hard and you have to take care of the kids. Maybe that's the day you don't post. I'm counting your 50 best posting days. The days that you don't post, you decide the day that you don't post. I mean, every semester, someone will say, my husband and I have this cruise planned. I don't know if I'm going to have good internet on the cruise. I'll say, enjoy your cruise. Just make sure that, you know, you've posted a lot on the other days. If you assign a question to discuss and students are quiet, only 3 out of 25 reply regularly, what would you do to encourage participation? Well, if I would come up with more posts that they find interesting. Occasionally, I will have a post that gets only 3 replies, and maybe I'll either rephrase that particular topic or I won't use it next semester. I have about 100 or more posting topics for most of my classes. And the majority of them will get more than enough posts within a week, and I'll close them out. So I tell the students, you will not run out of post topics. You will not have enough days in the semester to answer every single topic, and you don't have to. You pick and choose the ones you want to do. And I have no problem encouraging participation. I also give students who don't like the idea of daily posts other options for how they can do their writing. They can do longer project assignments, and we can count those instead of posts. I give multiple options gradings. And you describe these discussion post expectations in the course syllabus. How long is your syllabus? Great question. I have a 2-page syllabus. Now, how do I do that? First of all, my syllabus is electronic and it has live links. So to get more about the course objectives for Unit 2, which are not in the syllabus, you click on the link and, oh, there's all the course objectives. And that's how that works. I also have another document called the FAQ, the frequently asked questions, because what I realized about long syllabi is students at the beginning of the year, they're not going to read a 300-page syllabus. They want to know something when they need to know something. So in my FAQ file, there are live links. And if you need to know something about posts, you click on that link, and here are 10 questions and answers about the different posts. So I find that that's the way to deliver course expectations much more clearly to students than a long, unwieldy syllabus. Right now at the San Bernardino Community College District, we're working on different formats for syllabi, and we're exploring something called a liquid syllabus, which is sort of blending my idea of the FAQ file with live links to the traditional syllabus as well. Okay, anonymous attendee says, do feelings get hurt when students' posts are corrected by other students or by you in the general discussion board where everyone can see? Yes, I'm sure it happens. And I have a reputation for being harsh and tough. And here's what I tell my students. You want to be a nurse? You want to write things down that are going to have life and death implications for real people? Yes, I'm going to be tough on your writing. I don't want your hospital getting sued. I don't want your patient to die. And I say, if you think I'm tough, if you think the other students are tough, wait until the hospital accreditation team takes a look at your records. So yeah, we're not in this class to assuage your feelings and to give you false praise. We're there to improve your skills and your dedication to your career. Okay, to clarify, are students required to submit one post a day? No. Or are they simply limited to one post a day? Yes, they are simply limited. There are about 100 days in the semester. I count their best 50. So a good A student will post about 65, 70. They'll miss a few days during the semester, a day for worship, a day for family stuff, and get a few zeros, get a few 8s and 7s. But a good A student is going to accumulate 50 posts. As a matter of fact, this semester started mid-January. I have some students who have already gotten their 50 posts, already taken the final exam, already earned their 900 points, already have their A. And that way they can devote the rest of the time this semester, which ends in May, to their really tough classes, the OChem, the microbio, and the anatomy and physiology. Okay, do these in-depth discussions take the place of written assignments? How are things like test discussions weighted in an psychology class? Well, once again, I use multiple options grading, and I will give the discussion 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, or 50% of their grade. Now, if they don't get their points from that, how else can they get their discussions? I have a few essays that are worth 100 points. It's like 10 little posts. And of course, I have weekly quizzes, midterm exam. So I have a variety of options. And longer semesters, I also encourage projects, especially service learning projects for the students who haven't got any clinical experience yet. Okay, I assign homework every week, but they're not graded. So I encourage students to share their answers, compare and correct each other as a post. How would you suggest getting more student participation? Well, start grading it. And I recommend the multiple options grading. That way, if they do poorly, you can just say, well, that one was just for practice. We don't have to count it. Are the posts and tests pretty much all that students do? Well, I give a preliminary exam, making sure that they've read the FAQ. I give weekly quizzes. I give some optional essays, and I give optional projects. So I look at each course, and a lot depends whether it is an 18-week semester course or an 8-week or a 4-week compressed course. I've got to teach the same content. And if I have a compressed course, I'll emphasize other kinds of assignments like essays, for example. Have an essay each week worth 100 points, equivalent to about 10 posts. Then you manually compute grades. Yeah, but actually, it's not as hard as it would seem. Now, the fact that I may be a mathematical genius might help here, but there are some ways of looking at all this, this computations of multiple options. I use a simple Excel spreadsheet, and I take out the lowest scoring things, look at the 10 highest components, and if it's over 900 points, they got an A. Over 800, it's a B, etc. And it works. And if you want it really simple, you can come up with simpler, less mathematical approaches to grading as well. Can they see their grades as they move through the course? Yes. Well, let me put it this way. They see their point totals. and I don't always, have the actual calculations. I could write a computer formula that would do that. I'm not so sure it'd be easy to integrate with Canvas, but they get a point total on Canvas every day for their posts, every time they finish a quiz, every time they finish a test. Yeah, so they know how many points they have earned. Well, any more questions? Okay, well, are we done there?
Yeah, we are almost out of time. So I think now that we're out of questions, this is a great place to end. Thank you again so much, Dr. Brink, and thank you to everyone who attended today. If you have any further questions, please direct them to us at marketing@hawkslearning.com. Once again, we will be emailing you a link to view this webinar on demand. Thank you again for joining us. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you.